Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. So Chris and I are happy to present today. I'm going to go through just a couple of slides, if I can get them to move here. Go through the agenda, and then we'll carry on our conversation. So I'm going to stay on this slide for just a couple of minutes. So I don't think you're missing anything or I'm forgetting to move the slides. I have kind of a lot to say here as we kick off. Today, we're going to discuss a blind spot that many organizations have, and that is ensuring an agile but compliant emergency access plan for all of your business applications. If you don't have one, it can be super costly on multiple fronts. Delayed remediation of critical issues can result in lost revenue, a risk to the integrity of financial reporting, and possibly audit findings because Lord knows all auditors like to dig into emergency access and any processes you have around it. They want you to prove you have a policy and to grant access and review the activities that emergency or firefighter users performed, and especially to prove that when a user had exceptional access, that they only did what they were supposed to do, and who is responsible for all of this for various business applications, not just the ERP. So the reason it might be a blind spot is because organizations still tend to operate in application-specific silos. ERP teams still manage ERP, especially in the SAP world, and that is still the workhorse of most companies today. It's your Workday, Oracle, SAP, JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, NetSuite, Dynamics, many other ERPs. And sometimes the critical new cloud apps still will sit outside the scope of major control policies that govern the ERP. I talk to customers every day, and it's not uncommon for the ERP team to say the procurement team handles Ariba, another team manages Salesforce, and the HR team manages access to SuccessFactors or Workday. And when line of business teams own these applications, they typically also own who gain access to them. And when critical issues arise, the app team is mostly responsible to remediate the problems. What they might not be thinking about is the policy and compliance aspect of the emergency access process. Regardless of silos or centralized processes, organizations need to consider how they will respond to critical issues, ones that need a user to have elevated access to fix a problem, and that process needs to be consistent for all of your business applications, including your cloud. It's not just the ERP anymore. IT and security do not own the business processes, nor should they be the ones who determines the risk in the company, nor the controls for those risks. And for this reason, it's increasingly important that your GRC solution cater to business users. At Pathlock, we've started referring to some of the GRC functions as business functions, business privileged access management or BPAM, and business user access reviews, meaning these tasks have to be reimagined to support the type of data reviewers see that allows them to make educated and meaningful decisions about access and risks. So we are going to stop here and do a couple of quick introductions from our side. I've been in this business since right before SOX became a regulation. I was at Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis. I got pulled out of the business after a not so great pre-SOX audit. And I was tasked to help figure out how to manage segregation of duties for the business before our first real SOX audit. At the time, the business was breweries, entertainment parks, bottling plants, sod farms, media production, you name it, we had that type of industry in one ERP. And we had to identify our risks and put controls in place for all of the business units. And I've had various roles since then in the GRC world, mostly working with large SAP customers across all industries, focusing on things like CCM, EAM, different types of really critical GRC functions. Chris, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the call today. I'm Chris Radkowski, and I've recently joined Pathlock, and I was at SAP for 17 years as the global solution owner for SAP Access Control. And the types of capabilities we're talking about are one of the most widely deployed components, probably the very first step in the maturity curve for managing access for ERP systems. And so I was responsible for product strategy. I created the SAP Security and Data Protection portfolio at SAP. Before that, I held senior roles at various companies that were significant in the formation of identity and access management markets as we know them today. I did a lot of thought leadership and presentations with SAP, and happy to be at Pathlock.
Thank you, Chris. So, and we're happy to have Chris. Obviously, me and I have been around a long time in this space. So we talked to a lot of people and learned a lot of best practices, probably put a lot of best practices in place with some of our organizations and customers. Um, I set up the topic a little bit earlier, but our agenda today is to talk about the privileged access challenge and how to tackle it via actionable tasks. And while thinking about all business systems, on-premises or cloud, ERPs, or line of business apps, and also starting to think about it from two aspects, IT related emergencies versus business process related emergencies. I think we've always had IT related emergencies, break the glass, password in an envelope, those kinds of things. But we really have to start spreading our scope to involve these critical cloud apps. As we said, Chris and I have been doing this for a long time. We've worked with and talked to a lot of people who share their stories with us, or in one instance, which I'm going to describe a little bit later, stories that we've lived ourselves. Companies today can benefit from the functionality brought by GRC solutions, specifically things like elevated access, firefighting, whatever term you may call it. But this functionality is also many times abused. So we're going to talk about best practices as well. I said this before, I am a firm believer in this. The business should be having accountability for business related issues. They should be knowledgeable and responsible for the users, data, and activities across their business process and in their business applications. Most times IT is not equipped to do firefighting in line of business apps. They don't know how to change approval limits or change critical master data. But in order to facilitate this, it's important to provide data to the business reviewer and approver that they can consume and take action on. To me, that's always meant exception-based reporting in easy to understand formats so the business can own the process as well as the compliance activities associated with that process. So these are the things we're going to talk about in the next few minutes. Chris?
Yeah, so definitely stuff happens, right? So, our systems are critical, they're complicated, and it's not a question if we can eliminate all risk or downtime. That's a little bit unrealistic. But we can make sound decisions and put in place processes that enable organizations to recover as quickly as possible while maintaining a complete audit trail. Systems can be affected by a variety of issues, and as Susan mentioned, we're going to kind of break it down for you today in sort of two kind of categories. One are unplanned or unexpected events related to, IT related, infrastructure related, perhaps a security attack type scenarios versus application related configuration or updates or configuration changes that are critically urgent. The key, though, is having a process in place that allows firefighters or um, privileged access very quickly to perform troubleshooting on a variety of different tasks. And within that framework, the critical thing is that you have a way of getting those users into the system quickly and a framework under which you can record or monitor the different transactions that occur, and then post session be able to review those in an intelligent way that allows an admin to ensure that the activities that were performed during that session are consistent with the original reason why the session was launched. One thing we want to emphasize is that this is significantly different. Business PAM is significantly different from what we've called IT PAM, because you need to be able to look at this sort of digital data and take account in terms of what actually changed, what the old value and the new value, and ensure that those are all consistent with what was intended to be changed. I think that Susan will talk about scenarios where there are essentially one click or one fat finger away from significant serious events occurring. And one thing that makes this so interesting is that if these systems are down or if they're slow or if they're affected, real world events really start to happen quickly. And we're talking about things like planes not being able to take off or factories not being able to, continue with their manufacturing processes and so forth. So, like Susan said, this is a critical for, ensuring that your business can handle these unplanned and unexpected events with this framework in place.
Thank you. I think we're going to move into a poll question, and we have a couple of these along the way.
Alrighty, listeners, it is time for the poll, so I will get that launched and go ahead and let us know. We'd love to hear from you. I'll leave it up for just about a minute. Thank you for your participation. And if you haven't already, go ahead and shoot in your answer. We're going to go ahead and close it out here in just a second.
I'm always curious to see what we're going to hear here.
Yeah, definitely.
All righty, let's take a look at those results.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Pretty much
Well,
across the board. Yeah.
yeah, but I am happy to see at least the second one, privileged access is granted for critical issues a few times per month or maybe less. I don't know, but I do think this is an area that many customers I talk to, they really do abuse firefighting. They have multiple sessions per day. They may have, some companies have 200 or 300 firefighters, which to me is just a not a good situation and really provides zero control when you get to that level of usage of a firefight process.
Well, you can see 25% are still, using privilege access daily to resolve critical issues. So we're going to talk a little bit about best practices as we go further along.
Yeah. And I think I'm just going to say this here because I do think I've talked to customers where they say, okay, I'm going to give my user their typical access that you need to do day to day, but also I'm going to give them something else via Firefight ID that they also do day to day, but I don't want to have to deal with SOD issues. I mean, listen, auditors are getting very savvy about a lot of this stuff, and they're not really letting companies get by with that, even just for SAP. I mean, really, they're really starting to dig into SAP firefighting and finding a tremendous amount of issues, including material weaknesses when it comes to this topic. So, if you haven't paid attention to it and you're kind of just doing business as usual with your firefighters you've done for the last 10, 15 years, probably time to kind of take a step back and look at it again, just from an overall how you're using the firefighting process. Chris, I'm going to let you take this
Definitely.
one. Yeah.
Definitely. So the costs associated with system downtime, if you go out there and search on the internet, these things are generally fairly well understood by organizations. So you can correlate system downtime directly to revenue or other business impact. So if you're unable to process, transactions or receive goods or um, I mean the impacts vary depending on what type of system is down, whether it's an HR system, CRM, your ERP or supply chain. They each have different impacts, but generally they're fairly well understood. And if you look out there, most of the metrics seem to point to about €1 million per hour of downtime. And we know in talking with customers that when there is any kind of significant event, like the system is down or processing transactions slowly, there's a serious escalation that occurs, and this is the clock starts ticking, and usually in about 10 minutes, there's a Tiger team established, or the IT teams are called in, and shortly after that, it's a C-suite starts getting involved. I mean, I'd say pizza's brought in, but usually it's a personal impact on people's lives. These things are incredibly stressful. And for those of you that have worked in situations where you're trying to resolve a complex issue, whether it's an application or IT or network related issue, being under pressure and trying to think through the process of getting the system back up again is extremely stressful. So these can be caused by a variety of root causes, but the impacts are all very quantifiable and measurable. We mentioned Jaguar Land Rover. I don't know if we've done so in this deck yet, but this is a really scary example, cost of downtime, where for those of you that don't know, there was a serious security event that caused Jaguar Land Rover manufacturing systems to go down for an extended period of time, and they weren't able to pay their parts suppliers. UK government had to step in, and so this is incredible situation. I almost put JLR out of business. But anyhow, there are other kinds of examples and impacts that occur. There are contracts in place, for example, like if you're a large government agency, you've got time frames under which you've got to exercise a contract, or penalties may occur. There are service level agreements that are secondary costs on top of just the pure revenue loss. But in any case, the business PAM, as we're describing it today, is really an essential framework that allow you to make plans in advance to provide the ability to quickly respond to these under, coordinated, managed approach. And so I think I'll hand it back to Susan, who will go through some of the sort of application level configuration and other sorts of settings and the kinds of impacts that are associated with those.
Yeah, so we've talked about this, and I think, it's good to have a plan in place. So Chris is talking a little bit more on the IT side. I come from the business side, and in line of business apps, the downtime or what might be considered a minor disruption can have profound impacts from a number of different perspectives. Chris just described a few: not being able to process orders, issue payments, handle incoming deliveries, import or export goods. I worked for a company, we couldn't do any exporting, and over 50% of our operations were exporting. We had some issues with our export system. I mean, you name it. For typical large enterprises, depending on the industry, as we said, the loss of service can equate to $1 million per hour or even more. And many times it can be much more than that. Business PAM capabilities are to address just these types of scenarios where urgent or critical access is necessary. And every second counts. You cannot plan for everything, but you can be pretty much guaranteed that something's going to happen that's going to require, you to act very, very quickly. For business-related emergencies, I remember this one yesterday talking to Chris, and I think it was probably a little trauma associated with this activity that caused me to kind of completely forget about it for a while. I saw something yesterday that reminded me of it, though. I was in a procurement lead position, and we needed to update our release strategy for purchase orders. And so I had done it before, and I put in several ranges. One that was $0 to $100,000 needed one approval, 101,000 versus, to 500,000 required two approvals, and so on. But my last approval tier was like $1 million to $3 million. And anything over 3 million was to require 4 approval limits, or approvers. But I just didn't do an over $3 million tier. I just had these tiers. And so what happened was anytime a purchase order over $3 million was issued, it went straight out the door. No approvals whatsoever, including not approved by the CEO, which was the policy. So it was just an example of, like what Chris says, a fat finger, or just totally blanking on setting up, making sure my tiers covered every possible scenario. But, we were out of compliance. Our policy was not being met when it came to procurement. We had to quickly go through and get that figured out, get it corrected, remove or stop the purchase orders, try to call, back in the day, we had to call the vendor, reissue the purchase orders and go through the approval processes and so on. It caused a tremendous amount of work. And the longer we did not get that thing corrected in production, the more purchase orders potentially went out the door, the more work all of us had. So as Chris was saying in his example too, it impacts a lot of people, and sometimes a lot of very important people when you get up to the controller CEO level. I had another customer that there was a unit of measure typo, and the pricing calculation caused the receipt of 600, a quantity of 600 of something, to be shown as $600 million worth of inventory versus $60,000 worth of inventory. And because it was month end, this was causing the finance group a lot of headaches to try to figure out what in the heck's happening here. Why is this so high? But they were able to figure it out. But it was after hours, and the finance person knew how to correct it. They just didn't have the authority or authorizations to correct it. So we gave them access through Firefighter. They went in and they corrected it, and it kept us from having to do reopening the month end to back post and do a lot of things and continue on with our month end closing process. So these are just kind of some real world examples of, innocent issues, innocent activities that cause a lot of disruption in the business that need to be corrected as soon as possible.
And one thing, Susan, I mean, it's we talk about $1 million or €1 million or dollars per hour typical, but if you're unable to create a purchase order and that gets delayed and you miss a discount, or if there's that order has to be in for a critical holiday period delivery, that can be catastrophic for a business. So it seems like innocent things can certainly manifest themselves into massive potential impacts.
Yeah, I think the funnest part about my job in today's environment is I talk to every industry, whether it's banks, insurance companies, manufacturers, um, service like Microsoft, tech companies, Apple, Amazon. They all have business processes that generate a tremendous amount of revenue. And you can think about all of these areas where disruptions can cause big, big problems. And to your point, you brought this up a couple of times, and it's not something that I've thought about, but if you do have to stock your shelves with items for Christmas and you do miss a window or something gets stuck in customs because you didn't do something correctly, whatever those things are, it has a lot of disruptions all along the process, including, a loss of your business, depending on your complete business. All right. So I
All right.
think,
So,
yep.
all right. So program requirements for business PAM involve a framework that starts out with exception policies. So you need to establish clear rules for who can take specific actions, under what conditions, and for how long. And so for this, you need to establish a role or ID-based approach to granting access under your emergency access framework. You've got to establish the rules under which we call it glass breaking. So you need to be able to record and capture the reason why that particular firefighter needed to create the session. And these are typically time-bound, role-appropriated, elevated access that you set up in advance. So if someone needs to get into a business application to resolve, an issue with a vendor payment, they need to get into vendor master, then you need to set up those elevated permissions in advance so they can be checked out by someone who wouldn't normally have those as part of their day-to-day responsibility. For every session that you create, there's a process in the back end to collect the activity logs. And one thing that we focus on is collecting a rich set of logs, whether it's, these are system dependent in many cases. So you got to be able to collect configuration change logs, transaction logs, audit logs, security logs. And so you got to have a way of correlating those with the session that has been created to address the, whatever the urgent situation is. You got to have monitoring over those sessions in real time so that you have visibility on how many different sessions, firefighting or emergency access sessions are created. You have to have an indication of when they started and when they're finished. And then critical for compliance and audit is a structured post-event review where a summary of the activity is created, pulled from the activity log information, and then routed to someone that has the experience to review those. And if it's application specific, like Susan was talking about thresholds, for example, understanding what was changed and why is critical in that process. And so, this is an area that we focused on a lot. I mean, not everybody is a domain expert in these applications, so you got to have an admin that can make sense of what change occurred and was that consistent with the original reason to launch the session.
Yeah, if you think about this from both an IT and a business related aspect, I mean, IT is helping keep these systems especially on-premise applications. But if you think about a supply chain company, you're procuring in Ariba, Coupa, E2 Open, Jagger, TradeShift, right? You're probably adopting a best of breed procurement application where you're doing your purchasing. You may have master data in MDG, you may have it in Informatica, you may have it in any number of applications where you're doing your master data. You may have all of your payments and different things, invoicing going out of SAP or an ERP, or you may have a Manhattan or a warehouse management application like Manhattan where you're doing goods receipts. If you think about a business outage, it could happen anywhere along there and cause serious repercussions across your business. So, what we're trying to get across here is that it's very critical to have a process in place for all of these applications because they all now impact your business. Whereas before, if you had good controls in place for SAP, you pretty much had it covered. Wouldn't you say, Chris? I mean, 10 years ago, that would have been the case.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a mix and match, right? Like we talk about Ariba and SAP, for example, and you may not have an entire contiguous process in one system. It bridges across different applications. You may be
Right.
creating purchase orders in Ariba and making payments in ERP, so in your
Yeah.
ERP system. So you got to be able to handle that complexity.
Yeah. And it's not just access and SOD and compliant provisioning. It's also firefighting. And I think it's kind of an outlier on a lot of people's strategies. All right, Jillian, next question.
Alrighty. Yep. And we got a new poll question. And it looks like, what kind of process does your organization have in place to quickly address system or data issues that will disrupt your business? Let us know. We'll go ahead and leave this up for just a moment. And if you haven't already, go ahead and submit your response. We'll go ahead and close out in just a moment.
We have noticed a bunch of questions coming in, Jillian, so we'll try to get to those in the Q&A.
Not a problem. All right. And if we could get Susan and Chris, if you have any opinions on the feedback from our audience.
Yeah, it looks like the dominant response is process is a mix of automated and manual, depending on the business application. I think that makes perfect sense, and I think we're talking about a system and approach that's really centralized, which provides the right kind of framework and helps you manage controls consistently across all applications. Of course, there are outliers, but
Mhm.
I guess that's what we'd expect. Wouldn't you think, Susan?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. I'm going to carry on here and talk a little bit about some more about best practices and really ways to think about a consistent, comprehensive, automated approach to privileged access management. At a high level, all of your requests probably will start through a user submission or someone submitting it on a user's behalf. It's going to include a reason that the access is needed. Maybe it references a help ticket or an incident ticket. Usually the access is approved by the line of business owner. The access is provisioned for a time-bound period. And then an audit log is generated after the fact with all of the details of what that user did while they had that exceptional access. In this process, it's good to allow the user to revisit any justification or activities they documented that they expected to perform, and then update it after they come out of the session if they did or had to do more than they had planned to do. This is going to give you a complete end-to-end audit trail for the emergency user access. You could put separate or extra steps into this, or you can keep it extremely streamlined. The main thing here is to ensure the process is centralized but flexible to ensure it meets your requirements. And then the workflow should be configurable in case a process for one system has to be a bit different from another system. Some examples of why you might have different processes per system. Some application owners may be fine with having a pre-approved process that's restricted to a handful of users, and others may require access to be granted every single time someone needs access to a line of business or ERP app. Some applications support both an ID-based firefighting as well as a role-based firefighting. But you have things like SuccessFactors that support this exceptional access and audit logging based on proxy ID. So that has to be an ID-based firefighting. Ariba supports role-based, but the role is a predefined and wide open customer administrator role. Think a SAP all for SAP for Ariba. That's what customer administrator role provides to Ariba users. So really important to think through now what kind of process you can set up, what type of roles or IDs does the business application allow you to have, and set your processes and approval in place related to that. The roles and responsibilities, just like most processes you have a roster of roles and responsibility. It's good for every one of your applications to start figuring out who owns these applications, who does approve access to these systems. Are they looking at access across both their line of business app plus the ERP? Making sure that you have these types of roles and responsibilities associated to each one of your critical business apps. I have up there again at that first one, the roles or ID based. A lot of SAP customers are used to ID based firefighting. And they want that for some of the other line of business applications as well, but it's just not possible to do that in every application that may be in your landscape. So you need to be open as you look at these. Make sure you know what these applications provide for you in the way of audit logging and different things like that. So we've done a lot of research on that. We can bring that to the table to make sure that we're granting the access in the way that that application expects it to be delivered. Best practices. So make sure you have roles designed by process. Keep it limited. Don't give them everything in a role. Don't give them SAP all through firefighting. Give them, if it's a procurement firefighter in the business, give them only access to the things that they need on an emergency basis. Restrict the activities. So make sure you don't put a lot of asterisk in an SAP role. Make sure it's time bound. Make sure that the access gets revoked in an appropriate period of time. It could be 1 hour or 1 day, but definitely do not give access 24/7 for a year at a time. Companies do that, and the logs are horrendous. It is not a control. It's nothing that you can provide to audit. Just not going to work. And then the session usage should include only the activities required to resolve the issue. This is where we get into, you have to prove what they didn't do. So this is where they document what they expect to do while they're in the app, in having the exceptional access, and then making sure that they didn't do anything on top of that. I worked with customers that have gone through Ariba audits. An Ariba audit, you get a role that is called customer administrator. That's what the emergency access user is granted. If you don't grant it through something that's logging what that user is doing, the auditor is going to tell you, you have to go through this horrendous log in Ariba that logs absolutely 100% of everything that happens in one log, and tell me that the firefighter user or anybody that had that role did not create a user, approve a purchase order, change configuration. And people really struggle with these audits to try to figure out how to get that information to prove that the user didn't do something. It's really, really difficult.
Susan, I had a conversation recently, and this is at a conference, right? So the guy, the customer was telling me a story about how there was a firefighter session that lasted more than 10 hours. And so somebody was given emergency access for more than 10 hours, which in a European country, that's problematic because of labor laws. And so he was telling me that one, it was problematic because they were supposed to essentially turn his computer off, which they didn't do. And then the second part was there was a transaction log that had 33,000 transactions in it. And and he was saying he's responsible from an audit perspective, to prove that all of these transactions were, consistent with what they needed to do. And so he forced this team to go back in and document every single line item in this massive 33,000 line item Excel spreadsheet that, with exactly what the transaction was, and why they had to execute it after the fact. And it took him 3 days. He showed me this spreadsheet on his phone. I mean, you can imagine at a conference looking at his phone. And then, so they had to go back in and document the entire thing, for this audit record. And so, that's just one example of maybe not the best practice. So if you do have an extended session, you need to conduct, make sure that the transactions are documented and consistent with the original reason why you started it.
For sure. Horror stories. And I think too, kind of revisit this once a year. A lot of people revisit their SOD risks, their mitigation controls. Make sure you revisit your processes for firefighter and that you have the right people doing the firefighting, that you have the process completed, that people are reviewing the logs. And definitely, pay attention to this, because I guarantee you, this seems to be just a hot spot for auditors these days, just for the ERP itself. Not to mention that they're starting to drill into things like how are you managing Ariba, SuccessFactors, BTP, and others. There's many. Another poll question.
Alrighty. And here we go for the third poll. Do line of business application owners participate in business PAM? Let us know.
I think is privileged access management is owned by IT. I still think a lot of companies do feel like IT should own emergency access, but it's with a lot of these new cloud applications. I just think the business owns these cloud applications,
I,
100%. And
they do. They have to.
yeah,
IT is not going to understand thresholds and
yeah,
payment limits and vendor master and specific things like things that are specific to a business process.
yeah,
You know, I IT shouldn't own that.
yeah. I have since I ever started this, and I used to do a lot of GRC implementations. I came from Anheuser-Busch, the business owned everything. If there was a security audit issue or anything like that, the auditors went directly to the business people. Then when I started doing GRC implementations, I realized IT was the owner of a lot of this stuff. And I always thought that's weird, but it was IT that had to respond to audits. So I've always been of the kind of push it back on the business. Yes, there's an ERP, and yes, IT owns that ERP from some aspects, but who has access to create purchase orders, pay vendors? The business should take responsibility for approving that access, monitoring that access, and so on. Just a little aside that's off topic, but I've always approached this to enable business people to really understand and own access to the systems, transactions that are posted, configuration that's changed, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, one example of that is that most sort of IT related PAM solutions do like some kind of video recording of the transaction log
Mhm.
or the activity, which is impossible to really, determine old value, new value. And so that's the critical thing is understanding what was changed in a granular way. So okay, so we got some results.
Yeah.
Alrighty. And with those results, Chris, Susan, is this something you would expect from the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're just kind of evenly split all across these questions. Either we're not asking the right thing or we're just getting a very, consistent mix of respondents across the board. I'm not surprised, I guess. I think it's,
Y-
yeah,
It's a knowledgeable audience, right?
yeah,
You guys are knowledgeable, right? It's a very few people don't know. So, privilege access is owned by IT, 25%. I would say that's fairly consistent with what we're seeing. LOB participates at some level, and it's a mix, right? So I think
yeah,
that's I think it's one thing I guess we're seeing is that there is some convergence between, the office of the CIO and the CFO, and this is one area where, you have activities that are, you know, fall under or fall under both areas, right?
yep. All right. Okay, so an overview. I want us to get to some questions, and I think I talked about this a little bit before, but from our perspective, Pathlock is a vendor. We play in the GRC space. It's really all we do is GRC and cyber. So this is where all of our innovation dollars are going to, and we really focus on consistent processes across multiple business applications. So in our process, you log into the Pathlock portal, you'd enter all of the information you needed for access, including those things I talked about on the process flow, the reason you need to access, what you expect to do. It will flow through to an ID or role owner for approval. The user will get access via an email notification or directly into a proxy session. All of those things are kind of different based on the system we're connecting to and providing firefighter access for. But the really key piece is having an audit log for a business reviewer to look at. And then end to end, all of that data is within one GRC solution, whether that firefight session was for SAP, Ariba, Workday, SuccessFactors, Salesforce, whatever application that user was getting access to. This is just a request or a look at our portal. They would come in and request elevated access for any or multiple systems. They would only request access for one system at a time, but the process would be consistent that they come to the same portal, they request access for a specific system, then it would flow through the process of approvals. At the end of that, when the log or audit log goes to the business reviewer, this is where we're talking about really drilling into the details, not a video, not screenshots or screen scrapes, but really providing for that business user reviewer exactly what that user did. I realize this is not the most critical of changes, but what we're focused on providing to the business owner is what the user did. And in this case, it's for an Ariba application with before and after values. So if they changed a configuration field or a master data field, or they created a user, whatever that user did while they had access to the customer administrator role, we would be able to push that back to the reviewer, business reviewer, and show them exactly what was changed. On the flip side, you can prove what they did not do, or did, you don't have to prove the negative here because we know exactly what they did do. SuccessFactors, this one is where it's ID-based firefighting, and we grant access to the proxy ID, which provides elevated access. This is also something auditors are drilling into. They want you to lock down the proxy ID access in SuccessFactors all the time. They do not want someone to be able to go in and invoke a proxy ID without having a logging mechanism around it. We provide that through our same consistent approach. But when that user is in using or having the proxy ID access, we can show exactly what that user changed in SuccessFactors. And here it was a pay rate, something a little bit more critical. And what did they change it from and to? This gives that business reviewer, a tremendous amount of information and allows them to make the approval process or do the approval action that in a very quick way. Then we have just even firefighting for SAP S4. So SAP hasn't really updated any of their logging capabilities when S4 came along. So there's a whole lot of new logs or audit logs that we are pulling in, whether it's the gateway log, the HTTPS log, all of those different things we're also pulling in, as well as Fiori and OData services usage. All of that stuff is really critical for S4 environments. And to date, the SAP firefighting that they had in place for SAP ECC is still kind of the same firefight logging they're doing for S4, which really is going to be problematic very quickly for these customers. All right.
Hey, so one takeaway from that, Susan, I just wanted to emphasize is that when you're talking about a centralized process, each of these applications has a different security model. There's a different structure for authorizations. There's different kinds of data and actions that are logged. And so this is really, think of it as an example of, how do you accomplish this task across all of these different LOB or lines of business applications? Some you have to have ID-based firefighting, which is where you create a firefighter ID and then that user can check out that ID. And the other one is role-based firefighting, where the user goes in as their own ID and they access a role that they wouldn't normally have. But then behind the scenes, you've got to be able to control the duration of the session, whether it needs an approval or not. If it's urgent, maybe you don't want to have an approval in place to slow it down, but maybe there are cases where you have to have an approval first to launch the session. And then you've got to have a way of intelligently collecting the activity related to that specific session for review afterwards. And so those examples that Susan just showed are a couple varieties of, well, here, a case for Ariba, a case for SuccessFactors, and a case for ERP to kind of illustrate what centralized PAM or business PAM looks like.
Yeah. And, specific to the business value, I think we've talked about that, downtime, audit issues. I mean, no one has 100 extra hours in their month to respond to an audit issue. So putting processes in place up front helps all of the stakeholders when it comes to these line of business apps and ERP. And I think we all know the process. We've all put processes in place for ERP over the last 20 years. It's really just extending that same thought process, putting together the ownership, review cycles, audit logging, making sure all of that's completed into your day-to-day operations. All right, I'm going to stop here. I think we are really going on to questions. Was there a fourth poll question, Jillian? I don't know that there was, but
yes, there was. We have it being launched as which area of your privileged access process causes the most challenges today?
Okay.
Hey, if any of you out there have interesting stories, we'd love to hear them. I mean, this is these are often fascinating, and sometimes we're shocked, about, when you kind of peel the onion back a little bit about what organizations do in cases where there's unplanned, unexpected events, or even if there are specific like audit requirements that require you to do unusual or manual tasks that aren't part of your normal job. We'd love to hear those stories. So, it's fascinating to hear what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And if
All
you
right, Jen.
haven't already, go ahead and submit your response. We're going to go ahead and close out in just a second. Alrighty, and let's take a look at these results. Chris, Susan, anything to add?
Pretty much an even split again.
Wow.
Yeah. Involvement of non-IT business owners is inconsistent. I think that's just a challenge we have to work through. Business never wants to own anything. I mean, in some regards, I think they think it's kind of more of a IT related task. It's just not the case. So maybe uh, go up the chain and try to get some help from the C-suite on really taking ownership of some of this. All right. Where are our questions? Are they in? Okay, I see them in the Q&A. All right. I'm just gonna start at the top a little bit. Chris, what do you think? And
Yeah,
read
yeah.
these.
Let's just go down the list.
All
There's a
right.
lot of introductions, but
Well, there's a Q&A session. So how can organizations ensure consistent privileged access controls across hybrid environments where ERP systems are on premise, but critical workloads are moving to the cloud? Well, let's see. So we're entering live. Okay. So, I mean, um, I really think it's just a matter of making it a priority, describing to the business why it's an issue, depending on what your role is. This is going to get audited, and someone has to take ownership of this. And I do believe, whether it's an ERP system or a cloud application, um, I think you have to look for automation. You have to look for solutions to help you with this, and hopefully you can find one solution that can provide you firefighting and a consistent approach across ERPs and cloud apps. Whether your ERP is Oracle or whatever the case may be, Pathlock can certainly provide that if you want to look into that more. Have you found that all applications can be included in a centralized automated PAM process? That's an anonymous attendee, but I would say they can all be included in the ability to request access, approve access, and sometimes even provision access. But the first two for sure, a consistent approach to request access.
yeah,
Listen,
yeah.
we're
All is
connected
a
to systems like things built on bond systems or old applications like old ERPs. No, you can't always get everything you need out of there, but we help you automate as many of the steps in the process as we can. And then some, the last mile, maybe it has to be continue to be done manually. We cannot do
y-
100% of applications. Yeah, Chris.
yeah, yeah. I'd say all is a bit broad, but
Yeah.
certainly most modern lines of business applications, ERP, supply chain, HR, the major applications, there's certainly
Mm.
pretty good interfaces to integrate systems like Pathlock to support these scenarios.
Yeah. So the next one is, do you suggest assigning elevated access to project teams during software deployments? I know I certainly have an answer for this. Do you want to chime in, Chris?
I would say yes for sure, but go ahead.
Okay, so I have a customer that on their first SAP ERP deployment, for all rollouts of software deployments, they assigned access through Firefighter. Well, on their, I think, 30th ERP go live, like the 30th production instance, they were still doing that and they had a firefighter for every business process. So that's a customer that ended up with over 300 firefighters. And depending on what they were rolling out, the logs were massive and they were failing their audits. So I think you really have to be thoughtful about what you are doing and what you are rolling out. And if it's going to be hundreds of thousands of transactions, like inventory loads through a rollout or something like that, you really need to rethink that and put a different type of control in place. Others,
Yeah.
definitely through firefighter.
Like you were saying, I mean, if it's you're in a implementation or development process, I mean, there's clearly time periods where it may not be practical to have firefighting, in those cases. That 33,000 line item firefight log had to do with configuration changes that were required across development, um, queue, and production systems that were intended to align the different number ranges associated with purchase orders across different systems. So it was a lot of activity related to that. May not necessarily be the best use case for firefighting, but it's related to the question.
Yeah. Um, I'm going to go over to the chat and just read a couple of questions from there. I hope that's okay. How is this business PAM integrated into traditional PAM or identity infrastructure? I don't know, Chris, you want to take that one? How is this business PAM integrated into traditional PAM or identity infrastructure?
Well, I'd say there's significant differences between IT PAM and business PAM. And so IT PAM is more aligned with sort of credential management capabilities. Video recording, for example, of the different system changes. I would say at the application level, there aren't really integrations. At the user lifecycle management level, perhaps there are some, but there's a requirement clearly for both types of systems.
100%. And at the beginning of this talk, I said it's time to kind of reimagine privileged access management. There is a traditional PAM, and there is still a need for traditional privileged access. But you also have all of these line of business apps and really need to start thinking outside that box of traditional um, and putting processes around it. How do we identify and classify business critical privileged roles across heterogeneous ERP and cloud platforms? So, you know what? I don't think you do classify across ERP and cloud. I think you have roles for ERP and you have roles for cloud applications. When you log in as a firefighter, you're going to log specifically into an application. I understand there could be some cross-system risk or things like that. That would have to be taken into account, but you're not going to create a business role or a privileged role that's going to give you access to SuccessFactors, SAP, and another application all at the same time. You're going to get a specific firefighting role for a specific application. You can provision
Susan,
it all via the same portal and mechanism and audit log it all consistently. Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, I mean, if you were to classify certain roles as sensitive, for example, like these are the most critical ones, is there a process you would go through to do that? I mean, it's business process related clearly, and it's also maybe, related to, dollar value or revenue throughput, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, um, is there anything you'd say about how we classify roles in general?
Hmm. Well, I think most people have the ability or have been doing classification of roles in ERP for a long time. I think when you get to the line of business apps, you don't have, some of them you have no flexibility. They deliver roles to you, and those are the roles you have. You can't even go in and create your own custom roles, right? That's kind of in the case of Ariba. They deliver roles to you. I was working on another application the other day, customer brought to us. The customer had the ability to create only 5 custom roles for that application. And I think it was also a procurement or it was an invoicing application. So you really again have to look at each of these applications and figure out what they provide to you and how you have the ability to create your own roles or you have to use their roles. If you use their roles, it's even more critical to put processes in place because some of those roles have to be granted to users sometimes, but it is very, very broad access and really critical access.
Yeah, and sometimes, you'll get a list. I mean, SAP identifies specific roles which are considered critical, and that's probably not a bad place to start.
Yeah. All right, well, I think we need to wrap it up here. I know there's a couple of people out here that have asked many questions. I think we're happy to set up maybe a one-on-one time to go across several of these with you. But hopefully we answered kind of a few of these questions. We just started at the top and worked our way down. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us today and spending some time with us. We appreciate it very much. And I'm going to, Jillian, maybe turn it back over to you for wrap up.
All right. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close out. Thank you, everyone, for attending our webinar today. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you again and have a great day. Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.